Matthew Kalman, who has been a foreign correspondent based in Jerusalem since 1998, spoke at the Anti-Defamation League's conference in Tel Aviv about Israel and the foreign media. Kalman explained that there are 3 Ps that affect the foreign news coverage of events here: policy, parachutes, and paranoia. Policies, the declared and carried out Israeli policies which are sometimes not understood or agreed upon by the foreign correspondents. The word parachutes was used by Kalman in reference to the journalists who parachute into Israel without even knowing the language.
They get off the plane, and before they hit the ground, they're already reporting. And they don't know where they are. They couldn't point to this place on a map. They have no idea what they're talking about. And that goes right from the bottom right to the very top of foreign correspondence here. On the 11th of November 2004, I was standing outside the Mukata in Ramallah, the presidential compound. It was about 5 to 8 in the morning. Yasser Arafat had been dead for about 2.5 hours. And I was there along with 500 other foreign correspondents waiting to see what would happen when a convoy of armored jeeps turned up and skidded to a halt in front of all the television cameras, and out popped Christiane Amanpour. And she was going to go, she'd come straight from the airport, she was going to go straight on, live on TV, on CNN, to report the news at the top of the hour. So I thought I'd stick around to see what she was going to say. And so they went live to her at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the first thing they said was, so Christiane, we see you're standing there in front of the Mukata. Arafat had died just a couple of hours ago in Paris. Tell us, what exactly is going on in the Mukata as we speak? And she said, well, I can report to you that behind me in the Mukata, the Palestinian leadership are holding an emergency meeting to decide what's going to happen next. And I thought, no, they're not, because I just saw them all drive out of there 20 minutes ago. And then the next question they asked Christiane Amanpour was, and tell us what's going to happen. What's going to happen now with the funeral and everything? She said, well, Arafat's body is going to be flown straight from Paris here to Ramallah, and we're expecting the funeral to take place here in Ramallah this afternoon. And I thought, no, you're not, because they've already announced that there's going to be a big thing in Cairo this afternoon, and actually Arafat's body isn't going to be flown in to Ramallah until tomorrow afternoon, and we all know that already. So strike 2. And then they said, so tell us, Christiane, what's it actually like inside the Mukata where Yasser Arafat has lived the last 3 or 4 years of his life under siege by the Israeli army? And Christiane Amanpour said, I don't know, I've never been inside the Mukata. Strike 3. So there you have the parachutist who's dropped in to immediately start talking, no background, no knowledge, no relevant information whatsoever, but their job is to fill up the airwaves.
The term paranoia is how Kalman refers to the attitude of the Israeli authorities towards the media, and he explained how this paranoia was felt during the most recent events of the Gaza flotilla.
Because yesterday was a catastrophe for Israel on many, many fronts, but mainly on the public relations front, because an operation that took place at 5 o'clock in the morning, that was basically finished by 6 o'clock in the morning, there wasn't a single Israeli official prepared to say anything on the record at all, even in Hebrew, until 9 o'clock in the morning, which was the first official statement from the army spokesman.
Which was a non-statement.
Which was a non-statement. There were no official casualty figures given by anybody throughout the day, which is why we got up to 19 dead at one point, only to learn at midnight last night that it was actually only 9 dead, okay? And there wasn't an English statement issued by anyone until the non-statement by the army spokesman was translated close to 10 o'clock in the morning. Nothing. And into that vacuum, into that news vacuum, was poured the hatred and the bile and the so-called eyewitness reports that turned out not to be eyewitness reports from everybody else. And it's happened time and time and time again. I have a list as long as my arm of previous instances. The Jenin operation in 2002. I could go on, where the Israelis have simply failed to give us the basic information that we need in order to report. And into that vacuum, everybody else has been able to fill it with whatever they want to say. And the paranoia about actually allowing the press to operate here, and I'm not talking about censorship, I'm not talking about lack of freedom of speech, I'm talking about a criminal, incompetent negligence of the official Israeli establishment, which means that even with the best will in the world, wanting to tell the truth, wanting to tell it without distortion, wanting to tell it without any propaganda about what's going on here, I can't. Because the Israeli information establishment either doesn't exist where it needs to be, it's either criminally incompetent, or it's just silent. One of the ways to deal with that is for there to be an Israeli news agency that actually puts out this information, that puts out this material, that translates the stuff that is freely available on the radio, for God's sake. On the radio, in Hebrew. Just translate it, put it out. It means that the 300 journalists hanging around here who don't speak the language, who don't know what's going on, will have no excuse not to report the whole picture.
Summing up the conference, Abe Foxman, National Director of the Anti-Defamation League, came to Israel's defense in response to Matthew Kalman's complaints.
It isn't as simple as you said it. The operation was at 5. At 6, they did not know exactly what was happening. And at 7, they didn't know. And at 8, they didn't know. And at 10, they didn't know. They didn't know. They didn't know enough to come out and tell the world so-and-so has happened. And if they would have, and it wouldn't have been accurate, then the same media would have been out there saying to them, how come you misinformed us? How come you gave us half information? But okay, fine. Today the world knows. Today the journalists sitting here know exactly what happened. Today they saw the pictures. Today they can put in context what happened on the 5 ships where there was no violent provocation, and on the one that was. I would like to see the reportage starting today about what's happening. How many of those who rushed to judgment because the foreign ministry didn't know, it sounds so logical and simple, but unfortunately the reason that your complaint that there is no official Israeli news agency. And if there was, first of all, there is. Israel government puts out press releases. I get them, and I'm sure every journalist gets them. You know what they do with them? They throw them in the garbage because it's the official statement of the Israeli government. Palestinians have a press agency. There somehow is a greater credibility to that propaganda, to that point of view. That somehow has greater credibility. The news that was received in the early hours yesterday came from such biased sources, and the media of the world embraced it. And the media of the world does not embrace stuff comes from the Israeli news agency. So it sounds very simple, but it's much, much deeper. And it's that much deeper that brings us to this conversation this morning. Words, good faith, cynicism, double standards, etc. There could be better communication, but that's not what the problem is all about. That's not where the problem begins, and that's not where the problem ends, is because the Israeli government hasn't given a clear answer very quickly. The media of the world is reporting on Israel not because of that, but because, unfortunately, of a bias.